So I've prepared a wash of some orange and yellow to approximate a setting sun on a landscape. This is the view from my kitchen. There's some trees here, some beehives, 2 beehives, more trees, and a small amount of trees. There's quite a lot of brush in this area, but I'm not going to show it all. And then there's hills in the background that are soft, and I'll approximate in some evergreens that are here. There's a stream lined with stones. There's some water, and then on the other side, the inside of the stream toward the house, there's a tree that has recently come down and some big stones. So I've approximated with a thin wash some orange in the sky and a setting sun coming down onto the snow. And what I'm going to do now is just paint in some places that would be in shadow away from the sun. And in shadow. So, because this is a snow scene, so in general, most of the scene would be white, but there are some bushes popping up, and in those areas they would cast shadows on the snow. And also anywhere where the snow has indentations from the wind or because the land is sloped, there will be shadows in the snow. So I'm just putting in some of those shadows. Like around this trunk of this tree, there'd be quite a large shadow and a bit wind-blown curvature around the tree, and also around these stones that are near the tree, and some under this bushy area here on this side of the stream. There'll be some small amount of shadow under the bushes that will be here. And some other areas of shadow. There'll be some little bit of shadow for the footsteps that go to the hive. I'll show those. But for the most part, much of it will be, there's some wind-blown area. And the wind is coming across from the west, and the sun is setting in the west, so there'll be some wind-blown areas. I'm just going to indicate those. The main shadows will be the shadows from the trees going away from, and this brush is too big, so we'll get a smaller brush for that. What do I do with my little brush? There it is. So little it was hiding So I'm just using cobalt blue, nothing else at this point. So let's say these trees here, cast shadow is coming away from the sun. So the shadows kind of fan out. There's a big shadow around the tree, at the base of the tree, where the wind has moved the snow into a little bit of a crevice. So I have that. And I'm going to show it broken as it passes over the stream. Okay. In this area, these branches that will be popping up will also be casting small shadows. As will these branches over here, but they'll be in a slightly different direction, away from the sun again. And over here, when we go over here again, will be so these just radiate out away from the sun. And this tree back here, same thing. Again, the angle will be different for that tree. It'll come out this way. And these small ones here, just fine lines, small trees. got a few little ones here, so I'll show those on the snow. A few little ones here, show those on the snow too. Again, always coming out, radiating out away from the direction of the light. Now this one with this, there's some branches that will also be coming out, and we'll show some of those. Some of those branches coming out. Okay, so that's a start. The next step is to paint in some of that background. There's some rather amorphous evergreen behind, so if we just wanted to show a little bit of that with some blue mixed with some green and some red. To get us a sort of brownish green color that would approximate. So a little bit of scarlet mixed in with a little bit of green. I think gives us a nice, yeah, but not quite yet. So a little bit of scarlet with the green. Tones that green down a bit. Still not quite as good a green as I'd like. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so it's going to be a bit watery, but I know there's the evergreens are here, so I'm just going to indicate some evergreens, but you know, I'm going to remove that because I realize what I really want to do is first indicate the mountain behind, or the hills behind, and those would be very, very lightly shown in a soft, the trees in the picture are without leaves. So I'm just going to take a little burnt sienna and I'm going to tone it down with a tiny bit of cobalt blue. Yeah. And use that for this. That's a little darker than I really want. I'm just going to use that to indicate the trees that are brown and have lost their leaves in the background. And then I'll add here and there some evergreens. But basically the hillside is pretty brown. And even though there's some snow on the ground in that area, the branches of the trees would be sticking up, and what you'd be seeing is the trees and not the snow. So it's primarily a brown, very light brown. So I might indicate a little bit more of it as it gets closer. A little darker than the one in the back. Soften that line a little bit with my paper towel. The foreground, just put a bit more, the same burnt sienna, but not toned down with the blue as much, and a little bit less water. And not even. Some diversity in that color. Okay. As it gets closer. But then we come to the flat land that's closer, where the snow is, and I've already put a little bit of the sunset reflected on that. Now I'm going to take the green that we talked about, mixture of cobalt blue, a little bit of scarlet, and some hooker's green, and indicate there are some evergreens here and there. And just with some color, just indicating with color rather than drawing them in. Because they're quite in the distance. So we're just putting in shapes and letting some of those browns and oranges and colors blend. I put some of those same kind of shapes over here that will be behind some of these little trees. Because there are evergreens here and there in that background. I'm going to come in now with a little bit of more intense burnt sienna and indicate some dried plant life a bit at the base of some of these evergreens, and dirt, sticking some dirt, but mostly some kind of bushes and dried plants with a bit of a brown cast. Put some of those also, just a tiny bit here and there. And then as we go over here toward these trees, there are some groupings of, there's always by the trees some groups of little saplings and gatherings of leaves that have accumulated around the trees and haven't blown away. So indicate some of that here with just color, and some roots sticking up and dirt. So there's, I have the blue shadow, I'll leave that there, but just putting this over here and adding some more plant life and brush and stuff expose here and there. Just little marks and some things around some exposed earth and stuff around the hives. Okay, I'll just leave that, not too much. And then on the stream bank, There are stones, but there's also quite a lot of things among the stones. Little bushes, so indicate that. And we'll draw on the stones a little bit later. And in some places there's a lot of bushes down by the bottom of the bank. There's quite a lot of stones lining the bank. The old farm areas here sometimes did line their streams with stonework. A little more alizarin crimson for this side of the stream, and some down here where I have some bushes here. This is what I see from my kitchen window. So I was sketching this while I sat at my kitchen table. Okay. And put some more areas where there is some here and there, a little bit of bushes and leaves gathering around trees. The base of the trees, there'll be leaves gathering around them. They kind of get blown into the spaces near the trees. There. So that's a bit of a start. I'm going to take a little bit of darker. Instead of burnt sienna, I'm going to take some burnt umber, just darker. Let's see if it's dark enough. Not quite. Let's see here. Yeah, that's a little better. No. I want to just put in some little bit of darker marks. That is too wet and not good enough. I'll take it out. I think I'm going to go instead with a darker brown. Could use either a Van Dyke brown or a walnut, or even a burnt sienna with a little bit of black added, depending on what you have in your palette. Just making a few marks to show the diversity of the shapes. And then I'll come in with a finer brush later and put a few more thinner marks. This is just indicating little twigs and saplings and bits of leaves and things like that that are all gathering around the trees and near the stream banks. Bits of vegetation growing between the rocks and little branches just here and there. We'll do more of this later, but this is just a start to begin to outline the nature of the brush. Okay. A little bit later I might come in with some more violet tones behind some of these trees instead of just the cobalt blue. But let's take a look. Clean the palette here. Get the green away from the blue so we don't get any green in there. Don't want any green in the shadows. Okay. So I think I use that same cobalt blue, but in a few areas, add a little bit of magenta. So where the shadow is more intense, so I might make behind this tree, near the base of the tree, just going to make that shadow a little more intense, and then it can lighten as it goes away. Same here and here. So I just put a little magenta in with the cobalt blue. I can bring some of that out. In the center of the shadow, it might be a little darker. Magenta or a little bit of alizarin crimson can also do the same thing. Just give that shadow a little bit more depth and a slightly reddish cast or violet cast by adding it to the cobalt. And I'll just soften the edge and blend it a little bit. I think I'll put a little bit of those magenta at some of these shadows here. It's the magenta or the alizarin crimson mixed with the cobalt to make a little bit of violet cast, so that the shadows have some dimensionality. Because where they are deeper, they'll be a little darker and they'll be a little more intense. And where you have a big tree, it will cast a darker shadow, because less light will be going around the edges of the trees, making it so at the base of the tree, the shadow might be a little more intense. So that's the beginning of a snow scene. Okay. I know it looks very strange, but once the trees are put in, you'll begin to have a sense of that. Might bring in a little bit of that violet down here, here and there, just to harmonize it a little bit. And a little bit at the base of this one, these violet, these green evergreens, where there's some shadow. Okay. Just a little bit of that same violet for now. We may add some more layers later, but that's not a bad start. Okay. We'll let that dry and take a look at it later and see how it goes. But, yeah, I may have to soften that sun. I I worked it a little too much, I think, but I might soften it just with a wet paper towel. Okay, I wanted you to see, this is my painting in the natural light, and in order to do the video and have a little bit more light, I'm turning on these two very large lights that have cloth and white nylon in front of them, and it diffuses the light and it evens out the light a little bit, makes it brighter. So hopefully we have a good range of color that is clear. Excuse me. I wanted to show you what is going on here in the background. Okay, so I took some greens, hooker green, an olive green, sap green, and I'm mixing them together a bit with burnt sienna, because in the distance the green that you see, and also we rarely use I'm going to put a little bit of cobalt blue in there as well. We rarely use green directly out of the tube. So I'm mixing them together till I feel like I have the right color for my evergreen trees in the background. Because as they recede into the background, they won't be they won't be so green, and I just want to indicate them. So I'm just going to show you with a lot of water in the mix how I just dabbed color with this soft green here and there, and I'm just intensifying it a little bit in some places, but this is the same color that I used here. Okay, it's kind of a muddy green, but in the background you won't see those evergreens as being, and in some places I'm dabbing color and leaving little marks, but in other places I'm letting the color be more just a block or a mass of color. And normally in the center of the trees, it's a little darker because there are branches coming out in all directions. So it's more of a darker, intense look toward the center. So I'm just putting in some of these evergreens very loosely in this way. Now some artists would just paint the whole mass like that, because basically in some places that's what one sees. So let's do that in a few places so we don't have too much diversity in the marks to distract the eye. Okay, and I'm going to put a little bit of that same green in the hillsides, just a bit here and there, because there of course are some evergreens in that hillside. Behind the pasture. Now, this is the view from my window in my kitchen, but a lot of brush has grown up all around, raspberry bushes, forsythia bushes, burning bush, lots of saplings from maples and cherries, cherry trees. We have a lot of wild cherry trees out there in the back. So what I've done is taken out some of that brush from this painting, even though it's there, but just to have more of a vista. Okay, so that's what I've done for that green. Very subtle green. And as for the mountain or the hillside, it's primarily burnt sienna. So I'm showing you here. I'm going to put some more of that on here. I primarily used burnt sienna. Okay, I can tone it down a little bit but not too much. I want to keep the brownish tone because basically that hillside is the tops of many trees and their branches in the wintertime and those branches don't have leaves on them, and they leave basically a very soft brown view of the hillside. So I'm just going to put, oh, my puppies are saying hello. One of my little puppies has a cone on her head because she had a little bit of surgery on her eye because one of the eyelashes were turned in on one eye. So they had to just fix the lid so that she wasn't having her eye scratched all the time. It's the first time I've had that in 25 years of breeding poodles, but anyway, she had that. So she's 6 months old, and we just had that little bit of surgery. So now that may be a little more definition on the mountain that I want, but I'm not going to worry about it for now. I'll take my paper towel and dab a little bit over here under the sun, where the sun would basically hit the trees and lighten them there. Okay, so now I'm going to leave that to dry, and I wanted to also show you the burnt sienna here with a little bit of scarlet and some blue, and darken that. So you can work with a very limited palette of just red and blue and yellow. You don't have to have a lot of colors. I kind of like to have a lot of colors because I enjoy them, but you don't need to. So I just wanted to put some of this darker color. I wonder what they're barking at the base, because under the evergreen trees there's quite a lot of shadow, and there are bushes and things, but there's quite a lot of shadow under the trees and between the trees. So I'm just going to put some marks there. And I could have also used my Van Dyke brown. If I took a little of my Van Dyke brown, which is here, I think you can see that. Took a little bit of my Van Dyke brown. I could bring that in too, but I didn't need to. I could just darken it with the blue and the scarlet and the burnt sienna. So it's up to you how you want to do. Some artists work with a very limited palette of just 2 yellows, 1 red, and 2 blues, or 1 blue. So, and you can get by with that. One of my favorite artists always works with a very limited palette. That's Eric Michaels. You should look at his work. His work is so wonderful, and I can't say I have a favorite because they're all so amazing, and they're diverse enough. But I can't help having been affected by his work. So, and after looking at it for years. But anyway, and I'm putting some burnt sienna in between here in a few places, just by itself, because it's a nice bright color. And I had already laid down a thin wash earlier in the video, and now I'm just bringing in some marks that are a little darker in this, hopefully not overdoing it. I have a tendency to, that's one of my failings, one of my many failings, is to overdo it. So, but just in a few places around these trees where I had put in already washes of the burnt sienna and the Van Dyke brown. I'm just putting in a little bit more. There. I think that's enough for right now. This is not dry yet, but when it is dry, one of the things that I want to do is tone down this yellow here. I'm putting some water on and just trying to pick up a little bit of color, because I put down too much color and it's too lemony a color. So when we come back after that has dried, I'm going to show you a step that I'm going to use to try to improve upon that a little bit and soften that whole sky and hillside area. But for now, let's let this dry, and we'll come back in a few minutes and do the next step. Okay, I took one of my scrubber brushes. These little brushes are just great. They're very inexpensive. They're called Silver Scrubber, and they come in different shapes. This is an angle one, and different sizes. Some are very tiny. They have a little tiny set. There's a little tiny one. Here's another little tiny one. And then I have, from another set, I have some big ones. This one's very soft. This one's more stiff. But the scrubbers are helpful when you really need it. And I had too much of a ring of yellow around that sky, and I had trouble getting that bright yellow out of the sky. So I took my scrubber and gently scrubbed around bit by bit and took out color and brought back a little bit more color, but diffused that sunlight, brought in a little more color at the top of the horizon, a little bit in the edges, just a slight wash of a little brighter color. Now I want to show you something. I want to even out that sky a bit more, and I'm going to do that with a mixture of white and Naples yellow. Naples yellow is a very wonderful warm color. See how warm and soft it is. It's one of the, if you're going to put only 2 or 3 yellows on your palette from a tube, this should probably be one of them. And this is a Chinese white, but I could have used titanium white or Chinese white. I find the zinc white is a little stronger, but it's a little more chalky, a little less natural looking. So I'm going today with the tube of Chinese white just because it was there. The titanium white seems a little brighter, but for these purposes, what I want to do is mix together this Naples yellow and white. Make a very soft, mostly white, but with the Naples yellow, very soft, buttery mixture. And what I'm going to do is just lay that over the entire sky and even some of the tops of the hillsides to diffuse everything. And I'm not sure, let's see which brush I might use. I don't think I want to use a flat. I should probably use a soft mop. Okay, so I'll use this. I use this very big soft mop. It's a it is a Kolinsky Sable Round, but I should be able to work fast and lay that color down very quickly and evenly with this. So I'm just going to do that. I don't use a lot of white in my paintings, from except for maybe a few little highlights. But this is one of those cases where I just want to soften that entire top part of the painting and even those colors out. That will put that hillside into a sort of misty background. Also, even putting it over some of these evergreens on the top there. And that's pretty even, I think, and we just let that dry. And I think you can see how it just softened and diffused that. I've put it in a couple of watercolor paintings to diffuse the background. I'll show you one of them. This one was done of daffodils last week. And I just put it over the amorphous shapes in the background and over the background here to soften and diffuse the background with the impression of the light coming in the window and softening that. So it was just a way to diffuse that background there. So this is all. I don't use a lot of white because it's a semi-opaque. I don't want it to dull the painting, but in this case, I think it's one way to create that misty, soft impression of diffused, gentle light. And so we'll leave that to fully dry. I did carefully dry on the low heat with a hairdryer the entire painting that had been done, because I wanted to make sure that it all receded back to being flat. Because when we put color on, even though we've got it all taped down, it buckles a little bit and becomes uneven. And I didn't want to try to have a wash that wouldn't be able to be perfectly even, or at least as even as we could make it. And without tilting the paper and letting gravity do some work. So I used the hairdryer and made everything very, very dry and waited until I felt that the paper was once again flat. And that was the time to do this, okay? So we'll leave this now to just dry naturally. We'll come back. I think some of these areas are pretty well done. And the next focus will be all the trees in this part of the painting. All the trees and their branches. And then what we'll have to do is the rocks down here and this stump and the river. Okay, the little stream, the stream that goes behind my house. As I said, this is my view from my kitchen window. I have put my hives out and I moved them from where they were before. We had a lot of trees come down in a tornado last year, which opened up some of these spaces. This is a stump from a tree that was taken down by the tornado. There are a bunch of other stumps here from trees that came down and stumps over here. I didn't put them all in. I made the choice of leaving them out, but I just put in this one stump that is there, and I can see it from my window. And here's the little brook, and we'll put some of the rocks in that line the brook and show how to do that. Well, I think that dried about as well as I could expect. And I think it did soften that sky and harmonize it with the background trees. So right now I just want to use a few colors to begin to make the trees. So I'm going to use some burnt sienna and some Van Dyke brown to begin. And I'm going to put, with a little bit of red maybe, I'm going to, on the side next to the sun, I'm going to put this more reddish tone. So this is two branches coming out of one large tree. I'm going to make the tree a little larger than my sketch and absorb I'll put the beginning of some of those branches. So I'll put that on the side near the light. Now these dark lines, when I was making the sketch for the class on Zoom so that people could have a sketch done, because it's a painting class, it's not a drawing class. So I make the sketch for people and they can transfer it using graphite transfer paper. When I was making the sketch, and then I was tracing my sketch after this is my original sketch, but then I was tracing it with transfer paper. My fine point marker slipped between the two pieces of tracing paper and made some dark lines. But rather than scrub them out, I'm just going to absorb them into the painting. I'm sure there'll be enough dark branches to more than cover up that mistake. But never to panic, just let it go and say, okay, I'll just, it's in the location where I was drawing branches on the tracing paper. and it slipped between the two pieces of tracing paper and made those lines with the fine tip marker. So I'm doing some light color with a little bit of red to warm up the tone, burnt sienna, and a little bit of Van Dyke brown with a little bit of red. Now if you don't have Van Dyke brown dark enough on your palette, you can add some ultramarine blue to it, or some end black to darken it up until you get a color that is close to that. Another color that I like a lot, you don't hear it people talk about it very much. It's a little bit warmer, a little bit more purpley, and that's walnut. Daniel Smith does make a walnut. But the Van Dyke brown is a traditional, very dark brown. So it's easy to find and use. So I'm just doing it this way to have the warm side of the trunks done with this lighter color, as if hit by the sun. I'm not going to show snow on branches because this is, I'm going to assume that, oh, here the rubbing of my hand has made the pencil marks smudge a bit. But I'm just doing this roughly, and for the big trees, make sure that it's not too smooth. It's going to be shaggy bark. This tall tree here is actually a hawthorn tree, so it has a little different shape. These are mostly maples, but there is no, this is a tamarack tree, and there is a hawthorn tree here. Okay, I think that's good for now. Now I want to take that Van Dyke brown, and I'm going to make this whole mixture much darker, and I'm going to take some of this ultramarine blue and make it even darker. A little bit of red to make it a little more purpley on the back side. So I'm mixing these together till I get more or less the color intensity and the value intensity that I want. Okay? So I'm going to put some of that on the far side and bring some of it into the center. It's mixed with and make the strokes so that there's some mixing and side by side of the lighter color with the darker. An impression of somewhat shaggy, and carry some of the roots down. Okay. Right now we'll just do the trunks of the trees with these darks, and like I say, some lines on top of the lighter mix on the left, and the darker mix on the right. Of course, this will all dry much lighter, as is the norm. There's a branch that comes out here, and on this side I'll just make that one dark. I'm only going to take the branches up a little bit of distance because I'm going to use a much finer, thinner I'm going to take some of this burnt sienna and put that, oops, little hair there. When the brushes have hairs, so sometimes you just get these little hairs sometimes just come off. Okay, so I'm going to carry this dark again down, and sometimes go over a little bit with fine lines, some of the color below. I can even bring just some dark ultramarine blue in here now and then. Doesn't have to be all exact. I can bring a little red in here, but these are the 4 colors that I'm using, which are Van Dyke Brown, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, which is the darkest red, and burnt sienna. As I said, I'm making my lines sort of approximating the shaggy bark in the way that I'm handling the brush. In part, that's to be always reminding myself how the tree grows and what it looks like, but also just to get the kind of texture that I want here. So I'm using my fine point on this is a synthetic Escoda brush. It's one of the Zbruvic line brushes, which I don't see are available anymore. It's one of his, I think they're available on the Escoda site, but they're not on Amazon, for example, or some of the other sites for supplies. But Escoda is showing them still. But this is his older travel set that had 3 brushes in the travel set, and I really love them. After so many years of buying Kolinsky Sable, I learned that there were some amazing synthetic brushes out there. I should have learned it sooner. Saved myself a lot of money. I'll put in a little bit of red here and there, and that just changes the sense. And also the alizarin crimson is a wonderful color for giving a feeling of turning and movement. And of course with the blue it gives it a bit of a violet sense. So I'm just bringing in some sense of roots here in the ground, and then the nice thing is as we move to the darker colors after laying down the light ones, we can cover anything below if we want to change the width of the trunk of some of these trees, make them a little more dominant in the painting, because the trees were maybe a little too small for the width of the painting. So I'm making them a little bit wider and more dramatic by being wider. And then when I make them even darker as we go along, I'll make some of them with a little bit, I might add a little bit of black and small amount of color on the back of my hand, slid over and made a little bit of a mark there, which I don't want in the middle of the sky. Let's see if we can get that out. Yeah, that's good enough. Meanwhile, I'll dip my hand in water and clean it. Okay, back to the trees. One of the things you can use is a piece of parchment paper that you bake with. Sometimes to rest your hand on so that you don't make smudges in the pencil marks or the paint. And the other thing is I do have this wonderful little gadget that I can rest plexiglass that I can rest my hand on to avoid any more of those accidents. Okay, now I've got to just fill in that trunk up here. Take some blue, take some dark. I need a little more dark on my palette. A little more Van Dyke brown on my palette. Run out of it. Mix it in with the other colors. Okay, a little more ultramarine blue. Darken it up a little bit more. And blue it a little more because on the back side we're on the back side away from the light, so there will be more, you'll need more cool colors like blue and violet on the back side away from the light. Whereas we have that burnt sienna. I'll put a little bit of alizarin crimson down here on the warm side. And just putting a little bit on the warm side of the tree, on the warm side of that big tree. Just adds a little bit of diversity here into these. Now let's go back to the dark and finish these tree trunks here. I'm putting this on the, as I said, on the far side away from the light, putting the dark color. And this is again another fairly big tree. Now we can hear the church bells. So Sunday morning. During the beginning of COVID, we never heard during most of COVID, we never heard the church bells because they felt it was a call to church and not just a Sunday morning greeting. So no church bells. It was very sad, frankly. I think it was, for me, one of the more depressing parts of COVID was not hearing the church bells ring every Sunday. I was hoping that they would ring them just to brighten up our mood, but that didn't happen. Okay, I think that's a good start. Let's make this tree also a little bit bigger. It's a little small. Got enough small trees in the background. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Very dark at the base. Dropping in color here at the base. Okay. Let's see how that looks. Yeah. Good beginning. I think, yeah, it's a good beginning. And I'll just take a little bit of, I'm going to take a little bit of Payne's Gray, which is very dark. Put a little bit of Payne's Gray here and mix it in. Oops, there is one of my hairs. Okay, mix that in, and I'm just going to put in a little bit of that color here and there, especially down toward the base of the trees where they're thicker and therefore there would be less light. So that's Payne's Gray mixed in with the mixture of Van Dyke and with a little bit of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. The nice thing about the ultramarine blue is it is a granulating color, and so when you add it in with the burnt sienna or the Van Dyke brown or any of the browns, it will help to give you some granulation. put a little bit here on this back tree. This is the tamarack tree that it's one of my favorite trees on the property. It's very, very tall. I was surprised that the tornado did not take it down, but it did take down a lot of the trees next, the evergreens, all the big white pines next to it. So there were a lot of big white pines in this area. Those are not there anymore. So let's do this stump in the front while we're playing with the trees, the majors. I'm going to put a little burnt sienna on one side, and then I'm going to go in with some of the darker mixture that has Payne's Gray in it, and build in some of the character of that, and then just the one without the Payne's Gray, just the walnut, a little bit of the walnut, and a little diversity here and there. Yeah, this is there were a bunch of stumps here, but this is the stump that the American elm that fell on my car and totaled my car during the tornado. The tornado was in 2020, in October, mid-October. It knocked down and significantly damaged a total of 17 trees. So it's a big shock here in Connecticut because we are not tornado country. But with climate change, things are changing. And one of the big impacts, and I'm going to just finally show some of that bark on the other side, and then I'll fill in with the light color of the internal workings of the tree after this dries. I think that gives a sense of a tree trunk. Yeah, it totaled my Jeep in the driveway. That American elm. Okay, I think that's pretty good. We're going to let this completely dry so I don't come in and smudge it all with my hands. And then we'll come in with a rigger or a liner brush and some smaller brushes and do branches, and that will include some trunks, and then the final bit will be all these small little willow bushes, saplings next to the trees, some raspberry bushes that are here, some small maple tree saplings that are here, and some trunks over here. So we'll put in some of that. While we're here, we can put in a little bit of shadow color on the just a little bit of shadow color. Let's see. I think we'll use the Payne's Gray and put a bit of shadow color on another little piece of lint on the back side of these beehives, away from the light. Okay. And we can do more work on those hives later at the end, but at least this will give me a start. There are two frame boxes, one on top of another, and then the roofs. And they're sitting on stones, but we can fix that later. So that's the start to the beehives. I've been keeping bees here for about, I guess, since 2011. I remember ordering all the hive information, all the components when I was working in Kyrgyzstan, and my daughter was here with her husband, and they were minding the animals when I was working in Kyrgyzstan. And I had quite a lot of work in Kyrgyzstan. In fact, I even had an apartment there for every time I came. It's a big project to do the Issyk solid waste plan for the region of the Issyk Lake, which is a heritage lake. So while I was there, I thought, oh, I want to do bees. So I ordered all this bee stuff, and it arrived. My daughter was like, really, really, you're really going to do bees? And I said, yeah. And she's allergic, of course, to bee stings, and all of us are a bit, but I just didn't feel like we were going to get stung, and we could make preparations and protections. And as it turned out, nobody did get stung since 2011. So started doing bees, and I'm not great at it. Took off a year last year, but we're getting some queens coming this spring and start a new hive. Okay, we'll come back later and do branches and limbs and trunks in here, and here. Put in some of those details, and after everything is totally dry. Well, I'm going to put on my lights again. What we have right now is the bright sunny light from outdoors, and I'm putting on my big lights to try to even out some of those bright lights. There's some up here, but I think we can live with the fact that we have some natural light coming in. I had a lot of smudgy marks from pencil with my hand dragging over, so I waited till the paper was completely dry, and I used my what they call, I think, an art eraser cleaner, art gum eraser. Anyway, this is a good one for when I'm doing my drawings. I use this kind of eraser. It's like a pearl eraser, and I cut it up into little pieces, and whenever it gets dirty, I just slice off with a knife more pieces to keep it clean. So I cut these up, and I learned that in my portrait drawing class with Linda West, and it was one of the, from every class you have a few take-home things that you really cherish, and one was finding a way to have a clean eraser. So I use that for the drawing, but when I'm painting and I have smudge marks on my painting that are pencil, so I've just gone around and I've cleaned up my paper, so if it looks suddenly very nice and bright, that's because it's cleaner. But you can't do that until every tiny speck of the painting is clean and dry. Otherwise, you'll make a big mess. So I don't think it will actually remove anything that's under the paint like this mark. It tends not to remove any pencil marks that have had water and paint come over it. So you see that will not happen. But the next part of the painting that I want to work on with you is the beginning of the stones. So I think for the stones, we take some cobalt blue and some of the just raw umber, I think would be fine. We don't really want the burnt sienna, which is very reddish. Raw umber is more of a yellowish brown. So we want the stones to be a bit gray, but a little brownish gray. And sometimes they have moss on them, so there'll be a little bit of that too, a greenish tone. I think, let's see, is that light enough? I think that's, when you wet it down, you see how light it is? I'll put a tad more blue in this. Just a tad more of the cobalt blue. And maybe a tiny bit of alizarin crimson, because it's just a little too green. So I don't want that. I don't want the rocks to really have a green cast. I want them to have more of a gray cast. So I think that's, yeah, that's beginning to be a pretty good color of the most of the stones here are Roxbury granite. So they are gray, and I'm just going to lay down some blocks of rocks. And they're going to have some spaces in them. I don't have to follow any pencil marks on this. And I can go over some, but I'm just laying down some blocks of color. Some small stones, some roundish ones, some triangular ones. It doesn't matter, you know, you just lay down. This is the first step, just laying down some stones. And right now I'm making them all the same color, and I can come in and glaze over a few of them and change some colors a little bit if I want. I can have some lighter. I need some lighter and some darker. And that's just a matter of adding some water. And in some cases I'm just going to put like a little bottom of the stone and leave it white on the top. And then yet indicate maybe that there's another stone nearby. So it will show in some way that maybe there's some snow on some of these stones. I'll continue over here with a few more. And you'll remember that we had some stones here by the tree, some big stones by the tree. And right now, yeah, they're I'll put one over there too. I had some stones over here in the shadows. I'll just put a few here, popping up from the snow. Because in New England, there are always stones everywhere. So one would expect to see them popping up in the snow. And then we'll put some shadows around them, and that will, but this is just the beginning of a little bit of stonework, okay? Give some shape to this one. So this was the color, just a little bit of raw umber, cobalt blue, and a little bit of alizarin crimson. And that was the stone color. I'm going to put that plate aside because we'll use it to come back and do some more glazing. I'll put another little stone there. Sort of pointing to this is This is actually the focal point of the painting, this extreme contrast of light and dark here in the center pulls everything to the focal point of the painting. And it's very important that we don't create equal areas of light and dark elsewhere in the painting, because really a painting should have just one focal point. Okay? So we're pulling the eye into this central area. And one other thing that I can do now without going into other areas of the painting is I can put a little bit of light color, very light brown. It doesn't even matter what color it is. I can put a little bit of light color in the center of the tree trunk. Now that center of the tree trunk is a bit yellowish, but I think that it would be a bit of a distraction to paint it. I'll put a little bit of burnt sienna in it, but not too much there. Now here, this is distracting. So I don't like that. I'm going to take my scrubber brush. It's distracting, and I'm just going to pull that out of there, because while it's there in reality, I don't want it to be taking away and looking like maybe the the tree trunk blew its top or something and it was sticking out. So let's just separate that with my little scrubber brush. Like I mentioned, I have about 6 of them, different sizes, and so I will continue that stream bank, but just a little less dark where it was. Okay, good. So these stones will dry and we'll add some detail to them. And I think, while I will not, I think what I'll do is I'll take my liner brush, one of my liner brushes, and I'll take, remember the mix of dark colors that we made? Listen to the motorcycles. You know, one of the problems about having enthusiasts create the center of our town to be a scenic route is that we now have motorcycle drivers constantly seeing the center of our town on, oh, that's the 12, seeing the center of our town on scenic route maps and driving here. Sometimes some of the groups are really large groups, dozens of motorcycle drivers going by. But they drive very nicely generally, and they mind, that's a little too fine, that brush. They mind the traffic lights pretty well. And the speed pretty well, so. But it's just they're a little bit noisy when they go by. As a past motorcycle rider myself, I can't complain. You know, having been a motorcycle driver, you know, I used to drive up to 100 miles a day and commute and wipe in a town that was 50 miles from here. And I loved riding a motorcycle. But then years later, I started riding horses. And then when I became really involved with watercolor, it reminded me of when I used to be an oil painter back in college. It reminded me of the difference between oil painting and watercolor. To me, is the difference between riding a motorcycle and riding a horse, because the horse has a mind of its own, and you have to just adjust your seat and adjust your grip and your leg pressure. But every time you notice the horse punching up its shoulders or perking up its ears, you got to get ready that it might bolt or it might rear when you're out. Well, a turkey suddenly flies up out of the bushes in front of you. So I think I'm just using these various colors that we had mixed for the trees, and it doesn't even matter what they are. I use them, mix them. I don't mind having some variety. I just want to indicate branches. I might have to come back in with a rigger a little bit later to get those branches a little thinner and finer. But, you know, I just want to begin to put some of them in. Just to have a sense of where the painting is going. At this point, a little more full sense of where the painting is going. And I'll do some detail offline because it gets a little bit tedious watching somebody just put in a lot of lines. And like I say, it doesn't matter. I want some of them darker, some of them lighter, and I'm just taking it all from this plate of color where we had the tree colors and where they were a mixture of burnt sienna, Van Dyke brown, ultramarine blue, and alizarin crimson. But this is just the beginning of the trees. I'll have to be careful. I won't go there. I won't go on that side because it'll mean crossing over, and so I'll do that later. But the other thing I can also do is put in a few small sapling trees here in the background. Just a few saplings. And young trees, and also maybe a few trunks here and there. So a few marks, very light, a little trunk there, maybe a little tree in the background. Not too much. I'm doing this with a very watery, thin mix. Very thin, watery mix. I don't want it to be too detailed. Okay. I may have overdone that a little bit. I'll diffuse it with my brush and just plain water. And take some of that out. It's a little too much. I won't dab it because then that'll make the whole area lighter. There, okay, it isn't very... Okay, so that's the beginning. I'll put a few trees in here among the evergreens. Just very lightly. Again, because this is not the focal point, I don't want to get too excited about the detail that I know is there, but if I put it in, it'll take away from the story of the painting, which is really about the few trees in the front and the stream. I think that's probably more than enough there. Take a little bit of burnt sienna here, put it in some of that background area. To indicate the hillside. Okay, I'll have to do a little corrective work there because I messed that up a bit, but it's okay for now. One little step at a time. Okay, so that's the beginning. I've got to put much thinner, finer lines in. Is this dry enough for me to go over? Yeah, it's dry enough for me now. This is where you have to be careful, because once you've done that over the sky, you can't really change it without ruining the sky. So, a few little thin marks, but not over, and these are little calligraphic marks. Very subtle. They don't even have to be fully connected. Okay, I'll do more later, but for now, it's more than enough. Okay, good start. Okay, and while we have that, we do have some little saplings at the base of the tree, and little twigs always sticking up, things growing at the base of the tree. So just put in some of those marks, some thinner, some a little thicker. And over here, also in front of the beehive, there'll be some branches coming up. And around these rocks here, there'll be some sticking up out of the grasses around the rocks. I won't cover up the rocks because I still want to paint in some detail on the rocks, but there'll be some over here on the stream side by the rocks. Again, I'm not covering up any rocks right now. I want to put in a little bit of rock detail, but behind them I'll put a few branches and twigs sticking up for now. This is just the beginning of the of detailing in these areas. Okay, I'm not going to put it on this side of the stream because I want to still draw in some stream. And but over here, next to this trunk, there'll be quite a few. I know there are quite a few. And I'll just put the ones that are behind for now. that just gives you a sense, it gives us a little sense of that activity. Over back here we had some small trees, because we have these shadows, remember? So we have some small thin stand of trees here. And we had one here also, because I had put in that a tree here, so just lightly put that in, because we do have a shadow for that. So we have to have a tree where we have a shadow, we have to have a tree. Okay. And I'll put some thinner branches and things in later, but for now, it's the beginning, the first step. Okay, so it's starting to flesh out. We'll come back after everything is dry here and put, I just have to repair this that I scrubbed out. Here, this. I'm going to put the roof on this. Roof on the beehive. The same over here, I'll put the roof on. Alright. We'll let this dry and then we'll come back in and do some detail on this, on these stones. Put in the water and then put in the detail on this bank on this side. And these stones will be done. More detail of little branches and things around that. Some more fine line calligraphic work in here with the trees. Possibly some additional shadows to accompany the additional trees and rocks and shapes that we have here. So the final set of shadows will be last. And but that's how it is moving along. Hope you're enjoying yourself. I certainly love sharing my work with you, and hope that you pick up something from me that helps you enjoy your own work more. See you a little bit later. Well, I'm back after stacking wood. Remember this palette from the trees and this palette from the rocks. So I'm just going to use both of those. If you just use a little less water on the color of the rock palette, it's possible to put in some layer that adds some diversity to the rock. So I'm going to do a little bit of that on some of these rocks, just from the gray, adding a little bit of water to that initial gray, but not too much. Basically, all these rocks are in shadow because they're on the side of the stream, away from the sun, but the tops of them, of the rocks on the top and facing toward the sun, could have a little bit of lighter color. I'm assuming there'll be some snow on some of them too, and So we'll see how we address those as we go along. Leave some spaces that are white, and maybe that could be snow. Or maybe I'll just highlight with a little bit of opaque white at the end to add a little bit of snow color. I've taken many, many photographs and driven around just to take pictures of stone walls with snow on the rocks, because it's always good to run around and take a lot of reference photos to remind yourself what you've seen, because I'm not going to go out in plein air paint when it's really cold but I do drive around and I get out and I look very closely at it, and so it's sort of plein air painting is partly painting and partly looking carefully. So I have a lot of wonderful photos of stone walls with snow on in between the rocks. Now, most rocks have, some of the rocks have a little bit of brown in them, so I've made these all gray, but now is a good time to take some of these colors that are on the other, remember this other palette from the trees. There's no reason to go to my main palette, but just to use these colors that have already been mixed and add some darks on the side away from the light, and in some cases just glaze over the rock, like here, make it a brown rock, but in other cases just add some darker shadows. And again, the rocks are all different sizes and shapes. If they were big boulders, you'd have to put a lot more attention into them. And sometimes for the really big rocks, you can use a credit card or a key card from a hotel, any old plastic card, and you can scrape it along the side of what you've just painted, and it will carry the color across. So I mustn't do these all the same. They have to be nature is never all the same. So some of them will be darker, but some of them will definitely have some brownish cast. Some of them will be white, but I won't be showing the white ones. But I like the idea of adding some brown to it because it helps to harmonize it with the brown trees. This one I'll just put a glaze over it, a light glaze in the brown. This one I'll just put shadows and shapes. So I'll treat each one a little differently. I mean, one could just make little blocks of gray color, and that also would, I mean, you don't want to do it too detailed, but that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. I think it's coming together pretty nicely. I want some diversity in these stones so that they have some character. Then the next thing is to put some very dark bluish black between some of the stones on the wall. So I'm going to take some Payne's Gray here, which is a very dark indigo kind of color. This is Payne's Gray Blue hue. Okay. I'm actually going to mix that with a little bit of black to darken it up. Okay. And I'm going to put some of that between the stones. I'm going to leave some white spaces as if there's some snow, but I really want to indicate that there are these crevices between the stones where the chipmunks go and where it's very, very dark in there. And that, let's see, it's starting to define the stone wall that's along the channel of the stream. This will just be between some of the stones and, but not on the top, because on the top we have the sun reflecting, so not. Okay. So I'm also not showing this as a continuous perfect wall. At one time it might have been. In some places it's still a pretty nice wall, but in other places the rush of the water has pulled stones down into the channel, and I like that. That's good. I'm also going to put some darkness under this big stone here, because it's just to give it some weight, because these stones tend to actually not just sit on top of the ground, but be going into the ground, and so there's a lower part that they're coming out of. So I'm going to put a little bit of very dark color at the base. I don't want these stones to be looking like they're floating on top of the snow. So I want them to look like they're sinking down. And if this isn't quite dark enough, I want it pretty dark here, because this is a focal point. So I'm putting a little bit of a shape around them, as if the sun is, or the snow is, wind blown around the base of the stones, just as it is around the base of the tree. Now I have stones also underneath these beehives. So I'm just going to, I'm going to leave them all pretty much the same color, and just put some darks in the spaces of the crevices between the stones. We always have to sit the the hives up a bit so that they don't get wet and rotted by sitting on the ground. So sometimes I have them on concrete blocks, but they can also sit on stones. So I'm just treating this as these as stones, but they're actually on some concrete blocks. This will make them a little more rustic. They have handles in the front of the boxes, so I'll put that. The handles, and darken up the shadow on the box. Darken up the front shadow under the eave. of the roof of the box. You know, and that's probably enough to indicate that those are beehives. We don't want to overdo it, but I thought it'd be fun to have them in the picture since they are there. Now let's see, maybe a little bit more shadow in this area behind the rock. Again, I'm adding some movement lines as if these are a little bit of windswept. And also around the base of these trees. Okay, now this color, this Payne's Gray Blue hue, I'm going to use that for the stream water, and but add a little bit of blue and maybe a little bit of green to get a sense of the difference. Maybe a little brown. I'm just trying to get a sense of the color of what the water might be, because it's very, very dark. In the wintertime, the water looks almost black. And sometimes it'll glisten on the top when it has, like when there's snow around, it'll glisten on the top of the water like diamonds, really. But I'm just going to put some, I'm going to put some wavy lines as if there's some snow and or ice on the water, but that it's mostly going to be some flowing water. Normally there would be some ice, and it would look like, it wouldn't, some of it would have a little bit of snow on it, but again, like with everything else, I take a lot of photographs of the stream. I've been living here for 27 years now. So 27, yeah, since '94. So that's 27 years. And every year, in all the seasons, I go out and I stand there and look at the water and take pictures, and so I have a zillion pictures of it. That doesn't mean I can paint it perfectly, but it is very, very dark. Of course, when the light is it's in the different weather, you can see a lot of stones in the bottom of the stream, and sometimes some minnows. But in the wintertime, when there's snow, it tends to look almost black next to the water, next to the stream. I'm sorry, next to them. Hard to talk and paint at the same time. Next to the snow. But it also depends on what time of day it is and where the light is. So I'm darkening this up. I'm using it directly from my palette. So I had just put some fresh tube paint down, so it's pretty dark. This is the Payne's Gray Blue hue. I want it to be very, very dark, and yet to have a sense that there's flow. And it won't be like another season where you would see a pretty steady color and reflecting the sky and you'd see ripples in the water. It's not quite like that at this time, at that time of year. I'm not sure I can do that any better than that, so I'm just going to leave it. Okay. Put a little bit of color, light gray in there in that corner, just so that it doesn't, you don't have the feeling like we're pointing the viewer to go outside of the painting. Okay. All right. Okay, the next step will be to do, once this dries, will be to do some more blue shadows. And let's see, I think I might need a little bit more texture and shape in this rock. Maybe with a little bit of brown. Just to have it diverse, a little more careful lines here and there. Deepen up that crevice there. I think I'll deepen all these crevices here because the white there is a bit of a distraction. Just differentiate between the dark brown and the Payne's gray, black. Okay. Over here, this is a little too light under here, so it needs a little more color to hold it down, give it some gravity. All right, good. A little darker shadow there, maybe a little darker shadow there, tiny bit here, here. Okay. Not. I think that's probably a reasonable level of detail for the stones. There's one here that's not looking quite connected, so let me connect it by putting the dark in the crevice so that we know that that's a stone connected to the other ones that are below it. So I think we need to go back to the blues for the shadows, and we already have cobalt blue here. I'm going to take a little bit of cerulean blue. I'm going to take a little bit of cerulean blue and mix it with the cobalt to give it a little more bright color, because the cobalt is kind of a cool blue, and I just want to warm this up a little bit and give it some deviation in its colors. Not everywhere, but okay. So this is where I talked to you about. Now that has a little bit of granulation in it, which is all right. I want it to blend in softly. And from this tree here, showing the branches on that tree. And this one here. I mean, the shadows were already there, but I'm not necessarily covering them entirely, but just adding some more depth to some of them and some difference in color. Then there's this little one here, little tree there. And we do have the beehives, so the color's already there. I blended out, and there was some footprints going to the hives. Gotta tend those bees, make sure they're happy little bees. Okay. I don't think I necessarily want to do too much in that wonderful area where I have a lot of violet, and that's further away from the sun. But over here, maybe a little bit more shadow from the evergreens, and some from the trees, but that are in with the evergreens. I just want to capture that there's both evergreens and trees. Okay. And then to the side of the stones, a little bit of shadow. Okay. Now, with this blue, I want to put a little more evidence of dirt, next to the stone wall. So I can just add burnt sienna. I can just add burnt sienna to that blue that we were working with. I don't have to create a totally new color. So there's some earthy color. I want to have a little bit of more dirt around the trees and leaves. There's some leaves in there already, but I think there's always a pile of leaves and also near the bank of the stream. And that bank will continue to have some of the dirt exposed along the stream side. So I'm just going to do that, and leaves would gather up. So I'm just going to indicate that. And there'll be some leaves back here in this thing here that would just get piled up near the trees, at the base of the trees. Okay, so I'm just adding some more of that sense of leaves and maybe some exposed soil in that area. The same thing over here, a little bit of sense of leaves and exposed soil at the base of the tree trunk and around these rocks. Now I'm putting in just some burnt sienna to brighten up some of that brown. And that's a good color for decaying leaves. Just a few shapes here and there, like a little high note. I was overseeing the Society of Artists of Newtown exhibit this month, and they were passing out, the municipality passed out a leaflet about leaves, and I didn't realize it, that most of our pollinators, the queens, like of the bumblebees and the queens of other pollinators, hibernate in the fallen leaves. So they were suggesting that people not remove all the leaves, because the pollinators really, I'm going to put a little bit of that here, that it would gather also around the trees and the bushes, that the leaves would gather. But they said, don't remove the leaves. The pollinators really need them to overwinter. So I thought that was a real eye-opener for me. Okay, that's pretty intense. Now, the other thing that I want to add is, with a very dark brown, is the fact that, I'll come in with a sharp dark brown. Many of the trees have broken branches, and especially ones like this tamarack tree. It has a lot of broken branches, so it's a good idea to show some of the broken branches that leave a little stump. We don't want trees to be perfect. They should be the way they are. They might get a little bumpy. Okay. So I want to show here and there. I have to be careful not to smudge all the wet paint. Here and there, I want to indicate these broken, sometimes these broken branches aren't straight either. So I'm just putting in a few of those. Okay. And then the next thing will be to do a number of thin branches and calligraphic marks. That will be the very final step. Now, since I'm going to take some yellow ochre and mix it with the brown. And I'm going to use this little gadget so that I don't make a mess. But since we have the sun on this side, I'm going to take a little bit of that and make the color of the trees lighter on the sun side. So I just want to, I know I had already made it lighter, making it burnt umber, but I'd like to make it even another layer of, I can put some burnt sienna in that yellow ochre mix too, but I just want to have a sense of the light changing the way the tree looks on the side, exposed to the setting sun. So I'm just doing that. To create that impression a little more clearly. Okay. Yeah, because that light is very strong and it does change the color of the trees on the side where it is hitting. Okay, I think that makes those trees just a little bit more real. I'll do the same with this little tree here. Make one side just a mixture of that yellow ochre and burnt sienna. Okay. So I'm going to wait until everything is very dry and then just come in with the final set of calligraphic marks showing very fine branches and fine grasses and fine saplings. And then this painting will be done.